Have you ever been victimized by New Age spirituality?
We've been waiting for you. We've been waiting.
You're gonna want to listen up.
I'm Megan, an intuitive life coach and Reiki master.
I'm Ryan, a professional astrologer, and we want to show you what spirituality is by talking about what it is not.
Con artist.
Yes.
Snake oil salesman.
There are so many susceptible people out there.
And then they're tainted. They're ruined. They don't want to come back to spirituality.
We still have a lot to learn, and we will humble ourselves and learn, I think, every freaking day. This is Clairannoyance,
a podcast of spiritual interference.
Welcome back to Clairannoyance, Megan.
Woo!
Hi. Can you believe we're almost at our 1 year anniversary of Clairannoyance?
No.
One year.
Yes.
I mean, technically we've been working on it a long time.
I was trying to say.
Like, published episodes, like really been going at it like for almost an entire year.
Party?
We're gonna have a party. It's on my schedule here to like actually plan. Like we'll do some sort of 1 year anniversary episode. So I'm gonna like try and come up with some ideas for that.
We should get like matching hats.
So, sure, I guess. Why not? I just think it's really interesting, like cycling back around on a year here, and that it feels very, karmic wheel of life-ish, and like reminds me of reincarnation. And go figure, as we're approaching that 1 year anniversary, that we're cycling back around to a guest that we had on early in this podcast, and I'm really excited to have Michelle Brock back. If anybody has not listened to the original episode that we did with Michelle, the pilgrimage to past lives,
then what are you doing with your life?
Classic episode.
What are you doing? Okay, go back.
Yeah,
that was that we recorded that in 2022. That
long
was like
time ago.
Yeah, so it dropped, last year around this time, but it was recorded, in 2022. So, and she's doing big things, which we're very excited to chat about.
Yeah, that's why we're having her back. If you did hear that first episode, you know that Michelle was working on a book. As long as I've known Michelle, she's been working on a book. And that book is out in the world now. I'm so happy about it. We have our own copies, and we cannot wait to talk to you about this book because it's honestly brilliant. I have so much to say about it. We've got really good questions we're going to dive into with Michelle. And I'm thrilled to talk to people about this, and I'm ready to get it. The link is in the show notes. I'll just say that up front. We're going to like promote it again at the end and all the way through here. So, please do yourself a favor and get this book. I just want to say one thing really quick. I think a thing that really took me about this book is it's about past lives, yes, but at the same time, it wasn't at all. Like it was like a book that I feel like what makes you feel so rooted and grounded in who you are right now. Like there's so much you learn about the life you are currently living when you're reading this book. And so I think it's for anybody, quite literally. Like I don't care if you think past lives are bullshit or not.
And there are tools. It's not like tale.
Yeah.
So it's like an interactive journey that you're able to go on, which I like, because it's something definitely to add to your toolbox.
100%. 100%. It just made me feel like a book of accepting yourself as you are right now. Literally, like you go through all sorts of things, your looks, your body, your psychology, your sexual orientation, like all of
your
it.
name.
And then,
I mean, like,
yeah, it literally felt like the past life exploration. There's tons of it, don't worry, but it felt like that was like almost like this like extra valuable bonus, but it really is something that just made me feel so aware of who I am in this current life too. So that was a really interesting thing that I didn't expect, because I feel like the other past life books that I have and materials I've ever read are just almost more textbook style, right? And this was not. This was a whole different approach, and I absolutely loved it. So, with that said,
Well, it is an interactive journey. I mean, it's in
it
the
is,
title.
yeah,
Okay.
yes, 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 yeah, yeah. But I just didn't expect it to resonate so much with the life I'm currently living. Do you know what I mean? Like, I thought it
Mhm.
would be so rooted in like a past life sense, and it just it wasn't. That was my takeaway, at least.
Well, and what's interesting too, and we'll get into this, but you were not, like when you did your past life regressions with Michelle before, you talked about where it was like it resonated, but it also didn't, where you had like this interesting, like clear detachment, like when you had gotten stabbed, it was like, well,
Yeah,
and so it's interesting that you didn't, it's not that you didn't resonate, but there was a detachment, but then you have attachment to this book. If you hear me slapping anything, it's the book because it's in my hand.
and it was something where it was more just like I had like an intention going into my. We discussed a lot of this in the original episode with Michelle too, so definitely go back and listen if you haven't. But I I had gone into it kind of with a specific intention, but what I got out of it wasn't kind of like my reason for going into a past life regression. And so that kind of threw me a little bit, but I think I was more so taken aback or quote unquote detached because of like the mundane lives that were brought up. I know they weren't that mundane. You got stabbed, Ryan, right? But like but like I've just literally still continued to make connections to that regression and the two lives that were brought up. I mean, to the point that Michelle's sitting here right now, so I can just say this. Hi, Michelle. But like
Hi.
the person who stabbed me, I have now, I mean, so much time has gone by, and I went into that reading for an ex, right? And the person who stabbed me at that point, when I got that regression, was not back in my life at that point. And now they are, and they are like an incredible fixture in my life. And I just last weekend had a conversation with them about this regression, about the stabbing. It was like
Mr. Man.
one of the wildest things. Yeah. It was one of the wildest things. So it's just really interesting how this continues to unfold in my life in a very beautiful way.
Part of me as I pick
Truthfully.
my jaw up off
Dude, I
the
know.
floor.
No, I had like one of the most beautiful
Wow.
weekends of my life last weekend, and this was a part of it. So without further ado, Michelle, welcome back.
Thank you for having me. And that's so amazing that it continues to inform you. And maybe it gave you some insight into like why this person was in your life
Yeah,
and what it's not like, oh, you stabbed me. It's like,
right.
okay, what do we need to work out? And how can we, you know, better love each other, connect
Yeah,
with each other, serve each other? I love that. That's
I
amazing.
know. And
Yay.
what's funny is it was that person and another person like that kind of acted together in the quite literal stabbing of my back that killed me in that life.
Mm-hmm.
The second person in that basically kind of did like a backstabby thing to both me and this other person. So that's
Yeah.
why I brought it up. I was like, how weird. Like
Yeah.
this happened. This is like
I mean, I have so many questions that are not
I
appropriate
know.
for on
We'll
air.
talk about
You
it
know,
later. Yeah.
yeah.
You bring this gem up and expect I
We'll
The
talk about
past
it.
shows up in the present, right? Like that's
Yeah.
why I tell people all the time that your past lives are not this like far away ethereal thing in the past. And thank you for bringing that up in your introduction about how the book makes you feel grounded in who you are today.
Mhm.
To me, I always say, like, unless you're an archaeologist, who cares, right? Your past lives only interest me as far as they're informing the life you are living right now today. So
love
thank you
So
that.
true.
for noticing that
Unless
it's
you're an archaeologist, who cares?
right. Or a time traveler, which, like I dig too.
All right,
Um,
so we got Who Do You Think You Are? An interactive journey through your past lives and into your best future by Michelle Brock. First off,
Yay.
congratulations.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
How cool. Are you proud of yourself? I mean, like, that's a big moment.
I, it's yes, I am because
I was about to say, the only answer here, ma'am, is yes. This
I
is
am. I'm really proud of how the book turned out. I had a great team. I had a fabulous editor and, just a lot of people giving me input, but it ended up being what I wanted to say. and when that ends up happening, it's always a moment to celebrate. But, you kind of put it out there to the world and you're like, ooh, what's going to happen now? Right. Like, how are people going to respond? But it's been a really amazing journey. It's been so much fun.
How has the reception been? Because I have clients who have bought, I just had a retreat and I was walking back in and I heard one of the girls being like, "Oh, a new book I just got." Completely
Ah,
unprompted, by the way. Not
wow.
hadn't had a session with you. Yeah, so it
Mm.
was super cool. And I was like, oh, I have to remember to to
Yeah.
say.
I mean, the feedback so far has been really, really positive. People are liking it. And I think it's exactly kind of what Ryan said, that there's really it's an approach that I think is different than many other authors on this topic and subject have taken. And I designed it to kind of be something that almost anybody can connect with, right? Like if you're
Yeah.
just curious and you're brand new to this, that you can kind of enter gently as even as a voyeur, or if you're like a real past life enthusiast and you've been doing this work for a really long time, there'll be something for it in there too. And belief in reincarnation is not a prerequisite, because you can have a past life in this life, right? And many of us do. We talked about that in our last conversation. But yeah, like I said, it's out there, and people are coming back with great feedback. I've been really excited to hear that. You know?
Yay. And it does feel
Yeah.
very approachable for quite literally anybody of like any level of interest in past lives. Like it reads so easily. Honestly, it's such an effortless, simple read. It's not too massive and chunky and like academic sounding at all. But at the same time, you're a history buff, I know. So like you really go into the
Mhm.
history of all sorts of things. Like I
Yeah.
just like, can you break down, because I thought it was a genius um structure for the book, not only like past, present, future, of course, but like just, I mean, the title, who do you think you are? And then the chapters are all, you are not your name. You are not your body. You are not your story, right? Like, and so you say all of these things of like who you aren't. And I thought that that was so interesting and just the structure, because then you go into, in all these things, it explains, they all relate to past lives, but you explain like the history of names. Like, and it's just fascinating in a way. Like I never thought any of this would be in the book. Like I just didn't at all expect a lot of what you did bring up. So it's just really interesting to learn whether you're into past lives or not.
It was inspired by a lot of kind of the ancient kind of spiritual practices that are out there, right? That the idea of self-inquiry is
Mm,
you can trace it back to like ancient yogic tradition, right? Like the who is the I that is asking the question, And I think that, in our culture, we kind of tend to look at that as this kind of like lofty pursuit, or it's this achievement, right? We're doing the practice. And I really wanted to kind of show how accessible the idea of like the questioning of the self, like who am I, right?
yeah.
And it's based, the way that I structured it is actually based on a practice called neti neti, which basically translated means I am not this, I am not that, right?
Uh,
So chipping away at all of our false identities in order to discover the underlying truth of kind of who we are, which is that we're a soul, not a body. And I also wanted to humanize our past lives, because like I said, I think that we think about past lives, at least I did. The first time I was introduced to the idea was in a philosophy called Eastern philosophy in college. And it just felt like this thing floating on a cloud somewhere, right? Where I
mhm.
wanted you to really look at your past lives as people that had journeys and names and identities and struggles, right? And then once you're able to humanize your past lives, you're able to like expand that sense of yourself to include your former humanities, versions of humanities. And what that ends up doing is that when you discover this kind of new identity, you're a soul, not a body, you're able to actually see others in that same way as well. It can actually be a permanent change to the way that you look at yourself. So I kind of walk people through this process, kind of chipping away at, like, all of these ways that we identify, and we cling to these identities too, like who we are, ultimately with the goal to discover, there's a more universal kind of truth to our identity that transcends this lifetime and our bodies.
Yeah, this was like definitely the experience that I got from the jump on this was, and like throughout, was kind of like almost like a pendulum swing feeling of like you ask really good questions of who you are. And it's in there, like in the interactive elements of it. You've got meditations and journal prompts and all sorts of questions. And so I would answer things about myself, but then you'd like position information that made me kind of strip all of that identity that I had just solidified in my mind away, which
Yeah.
is interesting because it's a scary feeling too. And it's cool because you kind of come around to a lot of like the why of this at the end, even in the book, like you explain some of this. And it is a scary feeling of like losing a sense of self, but that wasn't what I felt like I was doing. I felt like I was expanding my sense of self. Like I was kind of like
Right.
being asked to chip away, I guess, like, I don't know, conditioned aspects of the self, like what I was told
Yeah.
I was or something.
Yeah.
And now I get to kind of reform a bigger, better version of me, you know? That's really what I kind of took away from this book. It's not a loss of identity. It was a finding of identity.
And I'm glad you bring that up, that there is a little bit of a fear kind of associated to challenging our identity, because we cling to these identities in the way that we see ourselves, the way that we relate to others. And one of the reasons that I felt like this was the right time to write this book was just all of the divisiveness and tribalism out there that we see, prejudice, hate, where we do cling to these identities specifically around kind of power structures, right? Like, oh, well, I'm this person and therefore I'm above these other people, or I have access to privileges that other people don't have. And, it was really, kind of at the peak of the Black Lives Matter movement that I was really like, okay, if everybody could see what I've seen, which is that all of these differences, and we cling to, we're like, our side's right and our side's right, and we need to assert ourselves over these people. And that if people understood how reincarnation works, there wouldn't be this kind of tribalism. There would be a lot more compassion and love and understanding. And that was my intention for the book. And that the idea that collective or societal change has to start with the individual. And a lot of us are fearful of giving up our identity, particularly if there's privilege attached to it, right?
Hmm.
So it's encouraging people to kind of look at spiritual practice in general. A lot of people are like, oh, well, I want to have a spiritual practice. This is the nitty gritty, how you get down to the spiritual
Hmm.
practice, pushing past that fear, learning how to lose these false identities that we create power, control, war, greed, whatever around, in order to dissolve into this universal truth that will allow us to kind of connect to our fellow human beings with a lot more love. And I know that it's a lofty goal. We have a long way to go, but we have to try. We have to start somewhere.
Absolutely. I'm
Absolutely.
actually really glad you said that too, because one of my questions was like just acknowledging that I think it's a big deal when any sort of practitioner takes their work or their service, what they do, and decides to kind of immortalize it, right? Or like put it into
Mm.
tangible form, make a tool that's digestible for people, like you've done now with a book. And so I was gonna say, like, what's the impetus of this? But like, I guess you kind of answered it in saying, like, putting it out now, it does feel very relevant and timely. But did you always know you wanted to write a book? You were like kind of waiting for the right moment. Like, how did you know this was something you needed to do?
I knew immediately when I discovered past life work and how much it transformed my own life. That kind of came with a sense of like responsibility to kind of pay it forward. Almost like I was gifted this incredibly profound experience that not only changed my life, it changed the way I looked at everything, and it made me into a better version of myself too. There were things about who I was and how I showed up in the world that changed, right?
Mm.
And so I knew that I needed to share this. It came with that responsibility, and I did feel that it was in the form of a book. The first reincarnation of this book was actually, I think, in 2008. So I've been at this for a while, and it's
Wow.
essentially the same book, but it was just a younger version of myself. I was kind of like, why am I trying to write a book when, and this many years later, 18 years of
Yeah.
doing private client work, I'm more mature. I'm a more mature practitioner. So this book kind of came with the maturity, but I think the first working title was how to use your past lives as a spiritual practice or something like that,
Yeah,
which that has a niche, but like I said, it was a younger kind of version of it, and it isn't essentially the same thing, but yeah, I allowed it to reincarnate many times, which I guess is appropriate given the
totally.
topic.
I love the history aspect because I was just like re-listening this morning at the gym, and the in Greece where you went, I think it was like where you if a slave owner wanted to release, writing it into stone. I mean, like there are just so many little tidbits like that I could have never learned, So
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
loved that aspect of weaving actual history throughout.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, and I'm passionate about travel. I'm passionate
You can tell.
about other cultures and connecting with different time periods. Like I guess being a history nerd serves me well in my profession, but it was really about creating context, right?
Mhm.
Again, so that your past lives are not floating on a cloud somewhere. It's like these were real people that
Mhm.
lived real lives, and they were you, right? Maybe you were one of those
Mine,
slaves,
mine
right?
Yep.
like
Yep.
jumped to hear that. These were
That's
real
right.
people
Real people
living real
and
lives, and
really,
they were you.
and they were you, right? So, like I said, it's really what I feel made the book feel grounded for a lot of people was that it really is about the human experience that we are having here on planet Earth. And, somebody asked me one time is having a passive regression like an out of body experience? I'm like, no, it is a very in a body experience in a
Hmm.
different body, right? It's an embodied experience. And, I have a Taurus moon, so that's kind of like how I roll anyway, right? Like it's all about how
True.
you connect to the body. So, yeah, but thank you for pointing that out. I wanted to give the context because again, it helps humanize, and also with the
Mhm.
idea that history is our greatest teacher, right? And there are a lot of conversations happening today about history, about the truth about history, about who gets to create the narrative about what matters and what we should be learning about, right? And so
Mhm.
I wanted to actually allow people to personalize that history, right? Your past lives are your own history. And then it gives you context to look at how we have evolved as a society, as humanity, as a people, through like, wow, I used to be somebody who was fighting wars and now I'm a pacifist, right? You can kind of track your own evolution over time, but from a very kind of human perspective, if that makes
I
sense.
Yeah, I love that you said it. And another reason why I love that you're a history buff and that you included so much context from so many cultures, so many backgrounds in this. Like so many client stories are just like layered throughout this book. Fascinating stuff. But also because you plainly say it, like you're like, I'm a white person, and I'm glad like you
Mhm.
made this important distinction. I feel like it's so easy for
Mhm.
white people in any sort of kind of spiritual related field to not appreciate cultural context and background, right? So you
Yeah.
had put in so many perspectives in this. I thought that was so important. You even have like a title in there. I think it said like, is it appreciation or is it appropriation, right? And you're
Yeah.
asking readers to look at this stuff. And I think this is a very touchy subject, like in many ways. I don't think it should be. It should be like very spoken and you speak it very well. But I want to know a little bit more, I guess, about that experience, especially when somebody like both the past lives I recalled, I was a white man, so go figure. But like, if I had recalled a different race religion, nationality, gender, whatever. Uh, like, what's that line of like, how can I learn about that experience without absorbing it into my current identity in an unhealthy or problematic way?
Yeah, no, thank you for noticing that. Like I knew I had to get that part right. And that started with acknowledging that we live in a white supremacist society, right?
Hmm.
And that people actually cling to identities from marginalized communities in order to preserve their autonomy, right?
Mhm.
That part is really, really important to kind of understand. And yeah, and I think that idea that we've been other races and ethnicities, it seems kind of, out there or
Hmm.
controversial even, but it's true, right?
Yeah.
So it was a matter of how I presented the material, which had to be through a compassionate lens, and I do occasionally meet people that are like, oh, I was this and this in a past life, so I want you to address me as such. No.
Oh
What?
man.
What?
Oh
Are you
man.
kidding me? Why?
No
No.
way.
I'm
And
sorry.
go,
I
yeah,
would
no.
fly to, I can't even imagine some of the dumb part of my shit that you have heard. I mean, I'm going to go to this world renowned, Michelle Brock, world renowned past life regressionist. And my dinky ass is going to say, address me as Queen of Sheba. Like, get
Yeah.
out of here. I
They,
cannot.
having a past life in a different ethnicity or culture doesn't give you permission also to claim that what being that identity is about, right?
A
And
white
that
girl named
was,
Becky who did that, wasn't it? Like, I
yeah,
mean, give me a break. That's
no,
just
you are
that's
not,
so
right?
insane to me that
Right.
anyone would have the gall.
I endured this in a past life, therefore I understand. And yes, on a macro level, that's true because we're
Right.
trying to create compassion and
Yeah.
empathy through understanding the shared experiences of humanity. But that doesn't mean that you get to change, like, that you chose this life, right? And
Yeah.
yeah, in this life, I'm a white American woman with all of the
Hmm.
privilege that comes with, right? So and I did have some trusted friends that are different ethnicities and sexual orientations, like, read it, because I knew that I didn't have all the tools myself to get it right, and I knew I had to get that part right. So
You
um
did. You totally
yeah,
did.
thank you. I knew if it missed the mark, it was going to be a
Yeah.
complete fail. So yeah,
I,
and again, appreciation but not appropriation, right?
so
You don't
important.
get
Like
to claim that you know anything about another culture because you lived it in the
100%.
past life. Yeah,
Oh my
yeah.
God. Literally 100%. And it's like,
What
I
did
don't want to
you
jump too
say?
far.
What did you say to someone who's like, you will address me? I mean, because you're way more diplomatic than I am.
Well,
Yeah.
it was actually
I would
at
lose my mind.
it was at a Halloween party that was a come as you were Halloween party, like come as you were in a past life.
Oh.
That's
And it
hilarious.
was a hotbed of appropriation. I was literally like, really, people? Like,
No, we're
A
still.
hotbed.
it was a hotbed, and some of these people are well-meaning, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
and I think that actually has to be acknowledged too. A lot of really well-meaning white people like want to be woke and want to like talk about this stuff. And it's like, well, at the same time, other people in kind of marginalized groups need to also, you know, not be compassionate, like, oh, poor
Yeah.
white person doesn't get it, but allow us time to catch up because we're learning and we need to
Yeah.
learn. And we need to constantly be learning more about each other and our differences in order to discover our commonalities. And like I
Yeah.
said, that was the intention of the book, that, different religions, a lot of different religions in the world are actually kind of saying the same thing,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
We all are.
Yep.
So we have to, like I said, we have to navigate our differences with empathy and compassion in order to kind of get past that, which is ultimately discover our shared humanity.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
yeah.
I I don't want to like jump too far ahead into like the story discussion that I am
Mm.
like really excited about, but that's one thing I was really it made me think about when I was reading the section about race and ethnicity was about like how me as a white person, like this is like why it's important. Like there's on book talk on TikTok, like the book niche on TikTok, there's like such a debate right now about like how you need to diversify who you're reading and reading, authors of different ethnicities who aren't just like white authors, etc. But also like this is why like I just made me realize like yeah, like I'm not going to identify obviously with like a black person's narrative and their life story, but I want to read their narratives. I want to learn from their stories. This is why I like
Yeah.
expose myself to their stories because I'm gonna get an understanding and an appreciation, right?
Yeah.
Versus the appropriation of it. I thought that was just like kind of like a revelation I had about it. I've had a few
Totally.
big revelations in this book, dead serious. Um,
Aw.
yeah. And there I it also made me think, okay, like some people and you kind of talked about this in that section too. I don't want to like be like giving the whole book away to everybody, but like the idea that some people feel incredibly connected to their race or their cultural heritage. They know a lot about it, right? Um, I, for example, am on the opposite end of that spectrum, totally disconnected. My grandma has like tracked our family back as far as she can go, but like it's a big, messy mutt of like white people. And I have no like tradition or heritage that I hang on to whatsoever. And it made me wonder, like, from your perspective, like the difference past life exploration can have for people who feel incredibly rooted in their heritage versus people who are
Mhm.
like, I don't really give a fuck where I'm from now or even know much about it, you know? Like, is there a difference, a way that they would explore it? I guess, especially if they realize, oh, I was a different ethnicity in a past life. Like, do you
I would love
notice?
that side note because in this house, I live in Charleston, and it is, I mean, so there's a lot of like Dixie should have survived still going on. And
Mm.
so I would, as you were all talking about this, I would love like a talk show or something where you bring on some just pure racists and like
I know, and tell
discover, I mean, yeah,
it'd be
because I
interesting.
think that could be so,
And we'll
yeah,
bomb
so
we'll bomb them with love and yeah, I know.
Yeah.
powerfully.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Exactly.
You know, I think I also too like you, Ryan, like my heritage in this life is just like a bunch of white people. I actually took that 23andMe DNA test and it was like 100% white. And my daughter
Yeah,
was like,
yeah.
you needed a DNA test? So you're like the whitest person ever.
Right.
But what I think, and I also felt disconnected from my identity. In fact, when I was a kid, I used to look in the mirror and be like, who the hell is that? But what I think is the root of that is privilege.
Hmm.
We don't have to be connected to our identity because we live in a white
Truth.
supremacist society,
Truth.
right? So, and a story that I'll share, and he's given me permission to share this. When I was in high school, I went to a summer arts program, and the very first day, they're doing like roll call because I used to be a musician. In this life, it's a past life in this life, and it was a music camp for high schoolers. And the first day they were like calling roll call, and there was a man, a kid at the time, standing next to me who had the same last name as me, but he was a black man. And I remember looking and going, huh, that's weird. What's that about? Right.
Mhm.
And the whole summer, I mean, he's just the kindest, nicest person. We're still really good friends. We would pose for pictures and he'd be like, this is my long lost sister. And, like, it's just like, it was like a running joke. It was the same last name spelled the same way. And then years later in our 30s, I reconnected with him on Facebook. And then I was like, oh, that's why we have the same last name. Slavery.
Oh,
Oh
That's why
my
we had this.
God. Yep.
And when I was a kid, it didn't occur to me. You know why? Because I
Right.
didn't need to think about it. Why would
Right.
I need
Right.
to?
Right.
So, and again, like I said, he and I have these like epic conversations. I still call him my long lost brother. He's an amazing person. But I was like, thank you for being so compassionate
wow.
and tolerating my ignorance. It was my ignorance, and my ignorance was rooted in my privilege, right?
Yeah. Yep.
So the reason that people cling so much to their identities and their cultures are because they're marginalized and oppressed, right? They come up with, different methods of creating community, around this oppressive system. That's my
Hmm.
opinion about it. That like some people are like, well, I don't need to think about my identity because you don't have to. You're not being persecuted for it, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
And we're getting better, but we still have a lot of work to do before we get to a place where we create a society that features true equality,
Mm.
right?
Mhm.
And I think that there are systems in place that need to be dismantled, and they need to be dismantled from within, which includes the people who have the privilege acknowledging their privilege and
Yeah.
being willing to give it up.
Well, not
That's where we're at right now.
performative, like no, a lot of white people, like they like it's performative, and it's like, no,
Yeah,
let's do the work.
totally. And I think, and like I said, there's a long way to go. And I believe truly that any change that we see collectively in society has to start with change in the individual. And that comes also too with marginalized people. A lot of marginalized communities don't trust allies because they're used to white people making it about us. Right?
Mhm.
Like, oh, look at me, I do charity work or like, whatever. And so it has to kind of go both ways where we actually have to start really accepting our shared humanity and being willing to build these bridges. And I do believe that past lives it is a really powerful way to really kind of like, again, to chip away at this identity. I have privilege in this life, but it's based on a false identity, if that makes sense. And if everybody could realize that, we could actually start to renegotiate the way that we interact with each other, the way that we create our systems, what we value, right? And so that was one of my intentions around this book. It's like, okay, go home and explore, see who you were, find your own humanity, and understand that it wasn't always in the form that you had and that you didn't always have privilege. We've been rich and poor, right? Not just talking about race, we're talking about circumstances. Some people are handicapped and remember having a past life where they have a healthy body, right? So it's really about understanding that the human experience is specific and individual, but also universal, if that makes sense.
Hmm. 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 An important thing to remember. Yeah, because I think that that's like part of the privilege is not almost like not remembering that. I think people who are in a minority of any kind are going to be more inclined to realize the universal nature, the we're all in it together side of life, and it's
Mm-hmm.
the well, frankly, like the white people who are not, you're kind of distanced from that. You can think it, but you don't really understand what that means. I think it's really
Yeah,
interesting, and
yeah.
like I don't know, reading that section too, it just made me think about the fact that the two lives I recalled, I was a white person, so it was just
Mm-hmm.
interesting to read some of that and be like, I wonder like where my brain would have gone had I recalled a life of a different ethnicity. For all intents and purposes, it was basically like another version of where I feel right now. But maybe that's what I needed at that point. It's very much
Yeah.
related to my life in this life, So I think I needed that, but it's just interesting to
You
think about.
always get when you do this past life work, and that includes all of the journaling prompts and meditations and exercises, it's always going to be relevant to your life today, and it's always going to meet you where you're at, right?
Hmm.
So like if the worst thing that ever comes up in a meditation that's ever happened to the history of all humanity, like some crazy calamity and war where you died like violently, it means that you're somebody who's ready to handle that because it's coming from your own unconscious mind. It's coming from like the realm of spirit. Also too, we can kind of go there with this, that time doesn't actually exist, right? The past, present, future all happening concurrently. So, understanding that this work is safe because it's a tool, and it's always going to show up in exactly the way that you need it to right now and be relevant to your life today. Otherwise, like I said, what's the point? It's a tool.
Mhm.
I
So we're like,
also
mhm.
no, I know. It's like there's really like no, there's like reading this book, you're gonna like be thinking on a lot of things. I really had to like tailor down our questions, honestly. I thought that the gender and sexual orientation section was also really interesting for me. Just because I learned facts in there, first of all, like that, gendered clothing was always a thing, but also the defiance of those gender roles was also
Hmm.
always a thing. I think that's important for people to hear about. But I'm like, you had some really good stories in that section too, but it just made me curious because unless I missed it, I don't think, have you had a client that had a remembered a past life where they were gender fluid or gender ambiguous, or two spirit? Has that
Hmm.
ever popped up before?
I can't recall like a specific
Yeah.
instance of that, but it's very, very common for people when I have them kind of look down and notice their body, the form that they're taking. A lot of people are confused. I'll ask if they're a male or female.
Yeah.
I only use those prompts for the binary cisgender, and I need to
Yeah. Yeah.
expand that actually. I've been thinking about that a lot lately. Like, are you a man or a woman? It's like with
Uh,
understanding there are more options. Some of them are
right.
like, I don't know. Or some of them will say, I feel like a man, and then later say, I'm a woman, but I feel like I present more masculinely.
Interesting. Okay.
It's very, very, very common. Like some people are right away like, oh, I'm a man, or
Yeah.
I'm a woman. I would say even maybe 15 or 20% of the time, people are a little like, I don't know. I kind of feel so I feel like that fluidity has kind of always been there throughout history, but again, it's been like oppressed or
Mhm.
suppressed in some way. So yeah, I do. It's very, very common. Some people are like, no, actually, I'm a man who presents more feminine, or I'm a woman who
Hmm.
presents more masculine. So that's common.
Yeah. That's so
Yeah.
interesting to me. I'm like glad you literally like thought of it all in this book. I thought it was so interesting. Which actually brings
I'm
me like
so
to
glad that the 2008 version didn't come out.
I know. No, I think you're spot on. Like it really is so relevant for the times that we're living in right now. You did a killer job of making it
Thank you.
feel like culturally important, like for the zeitgeist right now, honestly.
Mhm.
And like another thing, this is kind of like a side note, but another thing I was thinking about reading this is like I recommend people read the whole thing, of course, but it also, especially with all, I don't recommend reading it in one sitting, even though, like, I think feasibly maybe you could read it in a day, right? Like, it clips along at a nice pace, but there's all those interactive tools that you're going to want to give yourself time to work through, I think. But also,
Yeah.
I was thinking, like, you kind of could pick up almost like in any chapter. I maybe wouldn't go to the end, like
Mhm.
the last section, but all the other chapters, it made me feel like, are you dealing with relationship issues? You can literally flip to the relationship section of this book, read it, and you're going to learn some really cool stuff. Like I had a whole lot. Same with like, are you dealing with anxiety? Flip to the section about thoughts. Like
Yeah.
there's a lot you can kind of like just like jump right into. It felt like, because it's not like this like one big overarching narrative, like normal fiction story here. Like I feel like you can take it chunk by chunk almost, not in order. I love the order, so I'm not really recommending this. I think maybe especially like if I'm going back, if I'm like dealing with like, if I'm frustrated with
Yeah.
the patriarchy, I'll jump into the gender
Yeah.
section. Really?
No, thank you for noticing that, because I did design the book to not be like a one-off. Like I designed it to be something that you can go back and revisit again and again and again and find new information and new dimensions in it, because it's an interactive journey, and that journey can be continual. And I do encourage people to kind of do that in the work, to kind of see this as a process
Yeah.
of exploration that's just not like for this, like, oh, I'm going to read this in a weekend, to kind of use it as a tool continually over time. So thank you for pointing that
Hmm.
out and noticing it.
Hard.
Are there any plans of having like like later on down the road, like an interactive like workshop? Or if I mean like you should I could listen to you talk all day.
Thank you.
The way you
I am
explain things and the way it's beautiful. That's why if you guys can see the video, I'm like I couldn't get closer to my computer screen if I wanted to.
I love you. I am planning on kind of expanding this into some coursework. Like I'm still in the process of figuring out what that looks like, but definitely to and create community around this too. Like I really want people to share their stories, and like, because this is what happens when we start to like normalize something that's been so kind of treated like woo woo or new age. It's like, well, who were you in a past life, right? Like, talking about like, that one time I was in Italy. It's like, oh, was that last summer? No, in the 1600s. Oh yeah, I remember
Yeah.
you told me about that. Like, I
Love.
love it when people can actually
When I
take
was
these past
Fabio.
life memories and they're out of the unconscious and into the conscious. Then it becomes part of your narrative. And one of my favorite kind of exercises that I did in the book was I have people kind of put together like a slideshow, or like show like a photo album of like a trip you went on, that like to a past life that you wanted to like kind of show a friend.
Mhm.
Like, oh, I was in, you know, Venice in the 1600s, and this is what I saw and this is what I did, with the idea, like, when, I mean, I'm a lot older than you guys, but like back in the day, like people would go on a trip and then show their like boring slideshow to their friends,
Yeah.
like on a big screen or something, that kind of idea, that once we start to kind of normalize this, and then people can start to be like, well, me too. Like I really kind of, that's why I wanted to take it out of the rafters and kind of bring it down to earth, because belief in reincarnation is incredibly common, even in our Western culture. In fact, I read somewhere recently, it's a Pew poll. 38% of Americans believe in some sort of rebirth or reincarnation. And of
Wow.
that 38%, something like 65% are under the age of like 35 or something. So,
Mm.
and yes, of course, there are religious traditions that completely shun this idea or whatever, but like a lot of people are like, I believe in past lives, but I would never say that at church. And it's like, well, that's okay. We need to
Yeah.
kind of,
Secret
if
safe
we're
here,
not
Bob.
right. If we're not sharing these stories, right, and creating conversations and community around them, like, then it ends up being this kind of closeted experience. So I really wanted the book to kind of encourage people to, be out and share, not just their belief, but their own personal experiences, in order to get the shared humanity that you can find in other people's stories as well, right? Like, oh, that
Totally.
happened to me too, but that was in the 1200s.
Hmm.
So
Love to listen to those sort of conversations.
Oh yeah.
we're
Um,
creating that future as we
we
speak.
are, yeah. And okay, so one, I feel like just going with it's very appropriate here. Going with the idea of just like the belief in reincarnation. The section in your book about basically like your beliefs, your thoughts, really kind of like threw me for a loop a little bit, because I wasn't anticipating that. Like I feel like so many people will talk about past lives situationally, right? Like I
Mhm.
like, and they relate it to this life situationally, like that's why this person's in my life, where we've got the soulmate storyline or whatever, like this is why an illness is here, or why I was born a certain socioeconomic status. But the thoughts and beliefs section was so interesting, because how we perceive life is really freaking important to our experience
Yeah.
of it, right? And
Mhm.
so I guess, like, can you explain that more, like in depth, like the idea of situational versus psychological, like someone who lives in poverty and that being a part of their identity, versus someone of any socioeconomic background who still has a scarcity mindset, right? Like they might
Yeah.
not live in poverty, like, and how past lives can come, like, help you understand why you think the way you do. Just thinking, not even just situational. So interesting to me.
Yeah. Because I found that one of the things that fuels our behavior is our belief, right? I believe this, therefore I reject that, right? And looking at the root of what causes a belief really comes down to our thoughts, right? Our thoughts become beliefs when they become crystallized. So that's why it's important to question our thoughts. Where are they coming from? Is it true? Does it continue to be true today, even if it's from a past life? And a lot of our thoughts come from our unconscious mind, right? And our unconscious is filled with our memories that we can't recall, repressed memories, right? Including our past lives or situations, things that happened to us in our childhood, right? Like, I'm not safe because I had an intruder break in my house when I was 3. That belief that I'm not safe can cause you to not trust anyone who looks a certain way or
Yeah.
presents a certain way that'll kind of trigger those memories. So, you know, it's part of the approach I took with the self inquiry. You don't have to just question who you are, you have to question your thoughts,
Yeah.
you know, and that your thoughts are actually not you. Your thoughts are coming from your experiences, which include your past lives. And so belief actually becomes an identity itself, right? Like, well, I'm Christian, therefore I don't believe that. It's like, well, why not? If you've experienced it directly, I don't believe in past lives, but you had a dream in which you seem to be in a different body in a different time period. Yeah, but I don't believe in any of that, right?
Yeah.
So the idea to kind of, right? I hear that kind of stuff all the time.
Yeah.
To keep it fluid and constantly question your thoughts and whether or not they're true enough to form a belief system around it. Because then again, our beliefs create our behavior.
Yeah, that was a really cool section because it just makes you think about the
Thank you.
impact of past lives in a very different way than I think most people would normally think a
Yeah.
past life might impact you or how you would relate to it. Um, I also feel like a big part of you, this is me inferring a little bit here, but the all the stories that are in this book are so interesting, but I feel like you're sharing them and like you just things you're saying here too are kind of reflecting this. I feel like you're sharing them not so much to have someone identify with like a specific past life, like I was this gender, I was this race, and now this is, you know, a benefit of exploring past lives is so I can identify as that. I feel like you do a good job of expanding like the archetype of it. Like I loved your old
Mm.
maid story, for example. I also used to play old
Yeah.
maid all the time when I was little. So like so funny. But like that archetype, right? Like we think when we get that old that we're gonna be this type of thing or whatever. So I feel like a lot of what you learn about a past life isn't so much like that was the very narrow individual story that I
Mhm.
had in that life. It's more like tapping into this larger universal experience, like you're saying, right?
Right.
Does that make sense? I don't know if there's even a
Yeah,
really a
yeah.
question.
And the idea, and that's like the old maid is what you're talking about is that this card game. We used to play that, and it's, you know, everybody gets paired up, and whoever ends up with the last card is the old maid, and it's this dowdy looking woman in a comfy sweater with a cat on her lap. And, you know, being my age at the place I am now, I'm kind of like, her life looks awesome, actually.
Yes,
Right?
my
Like,
cat's in my lap
who
right now.
doesn't
Yeah.
want to be that person, right? Like, you know, and that is upholding this patriarchal idea that, like, you know, if you're a woman and you're rejected, you're the leftovers and you're therefore not deserving of a certain place in society, you know. And so it's kind of questioning, yeah, like that there are certain kind of expectations and stereotypes that we also need to challenge
Yeah.
that and these archetypes kind of represent kind of these beliefs around what's good and what's accepted and what's happiness and what life is supposed to look like versus what it doesn't. And when we open the curtain wider, we're kind of like, yeah, some people like might be like, oh, I'm an old maid, I never married. Some people are like, yes, I don't have a husband, it's
Yeah.
amazing, right? Like that it is very individual and it's an individual choice, and there's no right way to have a life, right?
Yeah.
That's why we have past lives in all these different configurations in order to kind of learn that, you know, happiness comes from within. You know, we are a whole person on our own. That's going to be my second book, will more than likely be about relationships and soulmates, and so I'll expand on that a little bit more later.
Oh,
But
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
so
We will. I can't wait for that, especially your thought process on twin flames
Oh,
because
yeah.
yeah. Documented.
yes,
Yeah,
yes. I mean
that's
Yes.
that eye
good.
roll, she rolled her eyes. That's all we
Mhm.
need. We're in the same boat.
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally.
Yeah. Which actually,
Yeah.
like, that was the cool part of the book, too. I don't think I knew that whole mythology of Zeus, like splitting the
Mm.
humans, because he was basically Zeus is a little bit of a prick from like all
Yeah,
my
yeah.
understanding.
Like like toxic masculinity, like
Yeah.
personified. Yeah, no, that's actually a quote from a work by Plato called Symposium, and
Oh,
it's a famous kind of philosophical idea on kind of mythology as it relates to humanity and relationships and soulmates. I think Plato was ahead of his time.
totally. I agree.
I'd love to know where he is right now. Is he
Oh my
reincarnated? Because he needs
God.
to write a book.
Have you,
I know.
I know, but have you like, has anyone's like famous people, have they been like, okay, the pick me girls who are like, I'm Queen of Sheba. I don't necessarily believe that. But
Right.
like, have you had someone where you were like, no shit, like you really were Elvis, or like someone like you've seen so many people,
I
like
have,
you've
yeah.
done that. I mean, so there's got to have been someone where you were like, whoa, buddy, I can't believe it. You coming through. That was believable.
Yeah, totally. I haven't found Elvis. I'm open to it. Like, come find me, dude, wherever you are. We got some work to do.
He's
But
still young. That'd still be a very young soul. You still have time. You'll
that would
find
be,
Elvis.
yeah. He'll find me when the time is right. Or she or they,
Hmm.
whoever,
They,
right?
who knows?
Yeah. So I have had a couple of people that I've worked with that were notable figures in history where I was like, did anybody see that? Like, and the answer is no, because it was a personal and kind of
Mm,
like private thing. But yeah, no, I think that notoriety kind of comes with its own, whether it's in a past life or this life, comes with its own kind of trappings and things, and there's benefits to it and drawbacks. And I think, like, again, it's
mm,
about learning how life works from all sides and having compassion. There's not somebody who's having this perfect, great life and somebody
yeah.
else who's struggling and suffering. Although we all have our stuff, right?
Yeah.
So yeah.
And you being such a
But no,
history buff too.
I'm never surprised though, because I generally get to know somebody a little bit. We spend some time before, but there have been some people that I'm kind of like, I found this notable person in history, and then I watch what they do with it. Like I've seen people publish books and start companies and do groundbreaking things, make films. And it's incredible to see. It's one of the most rewarding things about my work is to really watch who people become in the future after they recall their past lives. That's part of why I included the future aspect of it's a book about past lives, but it's really about the future we want to create, right? So
Yeah.
I think that's such an empowering message too, because so many people get stuck on like, well, this is my fate, like this is my destiny. And it's like, but you have an active hand in creating the life that you want. And this does such
mhm.
a good job of hammering that home.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. The future's not determined.
No, 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 no. Speaking of like you basically creating your own future here, I thought the section that like literally hit me the hardest is probably just like reading it at the right time. I don't know, but truly tears in the eyes moment
Aw.
when it was the section of like you are not your story. It was unexpectedly profound. Like, I don't want to give everything away, honestly, about this book. Like, seriously, people need to like pick it up, read it. But like, will you recount just that, like the how you opened that paragraph first, like where you saw the medicine woman, because it was so funny to me, like her reaction to
Yeah.
you was literally like you said your jaw dropped on the floor, and I think mine dropped on the floor at the same time that I was reading that. I was
Yeah.
like, "Well, she said what?" Will you please
Yeah.
just
No,
recount
no.
that?
It was right after I got divorced, and this is a really, really long time ago. Both of my kids were still in diapers, and I was just fresh off this divorce, and I was like, I'm going to go on this retreat. I went to Taos, New Mexico, and you know, the lady that I was talking to at the spot, she was like, I know this medicine woman, you should see her. So of course I'm like, oh, I gotta book an appointment. I need a cleanse. I need to be
Mhm.
cleansed of my past and I need a healing. And she just was not anything what I expected her to be. Like she was this like gruff woman and I thought it was going to be like rainbows and unicorns, and she was going to hug me and like smell like
So
patchouli,
special.
and
You're
yeah, like
amazing.
yeah, like you are healed, my child, like that kind of thing. And I she was like, well, why are you here? And so I started in like, well, I just got a divorce and I my kids and like all this, and my mother died when I was little, and my grandmother just died, and she would immediately just like cut me right off, like flapped her hand in my face, and she was like, "That is a really boring story," and I was just like, "What?"
Like a huge
What?
life moment. Like what?
I was stunned. And if you know me, I'm rarely at a loss for words, but I literally was dumbfounded.
Like
And and she just said, like, if you keep telling that story, it's going to keep following you around. And then she ended up doing this incredible healing session with me that did change my life. It was a really important part of my spiritual awakening. And
I'm gonna start
she
telling people that that is a really boring story. Like I mean,
It is. And I realized she was right. It was such a boring story. Like, it's a me. I'm a victim. It's so like, okay, like how can I transcend that story? So, and then when I started doing work with clients doing past lives, these past lives are stories too, right? So it's like, and I hear people that are like, oh, I was stuck in the plague in a past life, and that's why I'm a hypochondriac. I'm like, well, how can you use that story to transcend, to stop that path? Like, and I'm kind of like, okay, 500 years later, you're still stuck in that story, right? Like, I'm gonna get sick. Everything is
create a better
dangerous.
story. Yeah.
Germs are my enemy, right? So, yeah, I really wanted to include that in the book as part of your inquiry process. Like, what's your story? Like, if you keep telling it, it's going to keep following you around, and that is true for this life as well as your past lives. So, yeah.
it was, I mean, so that was so funny to me, but it was also just like such a like a true revelation
Mm,
for me personally. I think anybody's gonna like get like their own revelations in this book, but I'm just giving sharing mine here was lit because I am a story freak. I love reading books. I was like literally a storyteller growing up. I did like speech and debate, like competitive storytelling basically is what I like used to do all the way through college. And like firmly, and then I did public relations where I'm telling clients stories in the
hmm
press, right? Like I am such a fan of the power of stories. And to the point that it was really funny to me that you saw a medicine woman, and that's the medicine woman is the one saying like stop telling yourself this story, because there's this Jungian psychologist, Clarissa Estes, and she literally has like a few quotes where she says this, but she has this kind of phrase of stories are medicine, and so I've always like really hung on to that. But
mm,
this whole section made me think about it so differently, like that in a way I've never really thought about it, where I'm like, stories are medicine, but when I hear them, not when I tell them. I'm not giving myself medicine by
mm,
telling myself a story, but when somebody tells me their
right.
story, that's medicine to me.
Yeah. There's
Like
power in people's stories. Damn,
there's
that's
such power in people's stories. So it didn't make me think like, oh, stories are stupid. Like that's not what I got from this section.
No,
It
yeah.
was more like, oh my God, the hold. Like, and it really hit me because I'm like in the middle of telling myself all these stories of like all these freaking things that are going on in my life right now. And I'm like,
hmm
holy shit. Like these are situations like that I choose whether or not I'm gonna identify with these stories or not. And like,
Stories,
so I need to
right.
like start telling myself, like, this is a boring fucking story, Ryan. Get the fuck liven up your story, Ryan. Like figure it out or
I
whatever.
think
Like it's
it's a
like,
line that
Yeah.
we can both use with our clients, because you have these
hmm
people who are so identified with what has happened to them and the refusal to move forward. It just makes me, I mean,
yeah,
I honestly, I can't imagine. I'm going to try and use it in a lighthearted manner, but like it's such a, like, that's a boring story.
It's a boring story. And you're an astrologer, Ryan. So astrology is about myths and archetypes
yeah,
and story and how we weave, you know, the way we understand our lives through story, right? Like a story is how we give our lives meaning and context.
right.
So it's the idea that like you can be in a cafeteria though and go, I'm going to identify with this, but I'm going to put that back, right? Like and not over identify or attach to a story that isn't serving you. So it's about the stories that serve you versus the stories that hold you back.
Yes, and I think this is like a total benefit of past life exploration here is to then like confront yourself with other stories that were yours, your
Yeah.
life story, but
Yeah.
they're not necessarily in this life, but like it expands your perception of like what's going on in your life right now and it changes your own story, like I guess. And just to like
Yeah.
validate you, even with that same psychologist, she has this one quote where she says, like, a story is holy, it's used as medicine. I loved this. She said, the story is meant to take the spirit into a descent to find something that is lost or missing and bring it back to the consciousness again. So saying you
Ooh.
descend into an unconscious space, which is where your past lives are coming from. So
Yeah.
that is like you're getting the stories of your past lives like through,
Mhm.
the unconscious mind and you're making sense of it for this life. And it
Yeah.
just like
It's how we understand life as human beings. It's how we connect to each other too, like to share your story,
hmm
right? So yeah, it's not about losing, like no story is a good story, right? Like, we want to keep but we want to examine our stories and see if they're serving us.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like I still believe stories are medicine, but it's not when you're the one telling the story. Like like, I think at that point, like what you really need to examine that story because it could totally not be a medicine. It could be a virus you're telling yourself, right? Like you could be
Yeah,
really like making
exactly.
yourself worse by the story you're
Mhm.
telling yourself. So
Yeah.
I think that's really important. I have a request for you to read this paragraph on page 119 if you can.
Okay.
It's the paragraph that starts with it literally this is the one where like for me it just hit me at the right moment when I'm having all these realizations about this and like how I'm like wow I really need to stop telling myself certain stories. And I just thought it was so beautifully written. It's a short little paragraph that starts with "You can be free."
Thank you, Ryan. This is page 119. You can be free from your story. You can even choose to write a new story because you are no longer limited by the old one. There is power in the process of losing your story and realizing that you are so much more than the details and circumstances of this life. You can revise or rewrite it anytime you like. You are the author.
So empowering. The idea that like so many people want a story to attach onto, right? Um, like it helps you, right? It's like a firm, grounded thing that you get to like identify yourself with. And I understand the appeal of that, but like
Mm,
this was such a cool way of flipping that notion on its
yeah.
head for me, really, really, really. And just the idea of like you can be free from your
Mm.
story, like what? And that there's something to be learned from removing that story that you're telling yourself from your life. Like you don't really need to
I'm
live that.
so glad you connected with that. Yes.
So
Yeah.
good. So
Yeah.
profound
Thank
to me.
you.
Yeah.
Thank
Everybody like maybe
you.
if listeners if that's not hitting you the way it hit me, then you gotta read the book. Trust me, you'll see like why that just comes into this really
Not. That's
beautiful point.
applicable to everyone. Everyone's told
Mhm.
themselves, something that has kept you rooted in the past that is no longer serving you. I mean,
Yeah.
every single person on earth I have yet, I date, unless you're some sort of Buddha who's been on the side of a mountain. Isn't no. Everyone tells themselves a narrative and a story. So I think that's applicable to every person out there ever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And not to diminish like your divorce. Like that's a huge freaking thing in life, right? It doesn't diminish
Mhm.
that. It's just more about that realization of you will not get over this until you like rewrite that story, like this part of the story, but that's not the full freaking thing. Like where's this going from
Yeah.
here? You know what I mean?
Totally.
Beautiful to me.
Yeah.
Um
Thank you.
yeah. Again, I don't want to give it all away, but like the ending of your book does have a very uplifting quality to it about the futures that we create for ourselves, right? And like kind of bouncing off that
Yeah.
last question here. Um, I think for all the people listening who want a better future for themselves,
Mhm.
what words of wisdom can you leave them with for the future? Which, by the way, loved the destiny destination thing, like how the
Mhm.
word destiny literally means to forge a future, which is like I'm an etymology freak, so the word destination literally meaning like where you're going to be in the future when you're love it, love
Yeah.
it. So interesting.
That totally, like you can chart your course. Like destination is where you're deciding to go, right? And I wanted people to kind of feel empowered to their own future and the choices that they make by way of this process of self-inquiry. Like now that you understand more about who you've been in the past, we can figure out who we want to be in the future. And you're not stuck. The future is not determined, right? Of course, certain things happen, but who you become is who you decide to be. And I really wanted people to kind of look at past lives, not just as this ethereal, like I said, past far away thing, but a continual arc of our past that stretches into a future that we're actively creating. You always have a choice, and you don't have to die to reincarnate. You can reincarnate now, right? You can reincarnate anytime you choose. So that was the message I really wanted to leave my readers with.
So valuable. I even love that you said the sun rises every single day. I talk to my clients about that when they feel like they're running out of time to do something in life. I'm like, literally, the sun being reborn every morning is a symbol of the fact that you are reborn every single day and you get to choose
Yeah.
where you go from here. Like, this
Nature is our
was,
teacher, right?
yeah, yes, yes. I mean, like, this really was an unexpected reading experience. It like
Mm.
departs from all other past life literature that I've read, which is always filled with like awe and wonder. And really, it's got the spectacle of the past life stuff, but it's always so just past life focused. And this really does move you into a future version of yourself. And I mean, it's a really beautiful process that you can only be experienced by truly picking this up and reading it. So please, everybody, do it. I also just realized, like the other day when I was looking at this cover, that all those squiggle lines are people. And like it's a beautifully designed cover, but then I was like,
Yeah.
wait, these are people. Like
Yeah.
it was so
Their
cool.
portraits, the artists that designed the cover, I think did a really splendid job. I love it. It's beautiful. Yeah. They're people. They're
One
you.
more one more little question that I wasn't planning on asking, but now I'm thinking about it and just like the thing about,
Okay.
I don't know. Who do you think you are? Like if you're
And
imagine your next life and recalling this life, like what are you doing?
so, my answer, the gut knee jerk answer was going to be like, I'm everything and I'm nothing, like, that the idea is that, you're a soul, not a body, and stop taking it so serious, stop taking yourself so seriously, right? But yet take life seriously and live your life in the best way possible. Where am I going in the future? I haven't charted that yet. I'm still having a good time in this life. I'm not I'm not 50 yet. I'm turning 50
Yeah.
this year, but I still have some time.
TBD,
Yeah.
baby.
Um,
TBD.
but yeah, exactly. To be determined. Like, I a lot of people that kind of are like, oh, you should write a memoir of all these passive experiences. I'll get to that in my 90s, dude. Seriously. Like, I don't, because how do I know where I'm going? Because I haven't decided yet. I'm still creating that story and charting
Well,
my
I'll get to
course.
that into my 90s, and that's putting that expectation that you're going to be out there. Listen,
Yeah,
Martha Stewart like started off at like 50. I mean, she's 80 and still getting, still doing the dang thing. So I love that.
doing the thing. Yep.
Good.
Thank
So
you.
good. Yes. So obviously we know everybody can check the show notes, but please tell everybody where they can get your book, where they can connect with you. Is there a preferred place as well that you want people to get your book?
So I actually just found out that it's being sold on RuPaul's new online store. It's called Allstora, which he actually, yeah, he created around books with themes around equality and inequity and marginalized voices. And it also allows authors to make a larger percentage of the profits that
Hey,
they get. Yeah. So I'm going to say that's going to be my preferred, but it is on Amazon. It's in Barnes and Noble. There's something powerful about going to the local bookstore and getting it off a shelf. But yeah, I just found that out the other day. So, and good for
we'll
him.
link to that.
Yeah, all of the books that are either banned or at risk of being banned, he wanted to kind of create that platform for that. And you can find me on Instagram. I'm Past Life Michelle. I'm on TikTok, kind of Past Life Michelle, but just anywhere you buy books, you can find Who Do You Think You Are? An interactive journey through your past lives and into your best future. So
Congratulations. This is such a cool, I
thank
mean, a
you.
big deal. So, and buy the darn book, do the work, and message her. I think that's a one thing too, is you're so approachable. Like, like, so guys, message her. I think that as a, like as an artist, you want to know that people are consuming your work
Yeah.
and what
And
they
also,
think of it.
too, like I said, I want to create community around this book. So we're using the hashtag Who Do You Think You Are book.
Oh, okay.
Mhm.
So if you do have a picture of the book you want to share on social, or a story, like this is what, the book meant to me, or who I was in a past life, that's kind of where we're collecting these stories. But be sure to tag me and, let me know what you think of the book and, what you've experienced with it. But like, it's going to be just like really fun to kind of start to hear people's stories as they share them. And, like I said, we want to normalize this and create community around it. That's my goal. So
Yes. And I have another copy of the book that I may or may not be doing a giveaway with. So I'm going to do that in conjunction with this episode coming out. So people will, I guess, go to the show notes. I don't have all my details worked out on like which platform I'm
Sure,
going to do that on
I'll
yet.
buy
But
a few copies, and let's do a giveaway. I mean,
no, that's my plan.
yeah, support it.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
thank you guys so much.
Yeah.
Thank
But that
you.
said, don't just wait for the giveaway. Go buy the freaking book yourself and then
The book.
guarantee your copy, please.
Or if it's someone, let's give it to someone who maybe you're listening and you don't have extra dough. I'd rather do that, to be honest. Like shoot me a message, like, so we can get this to you. I'd like to give it to somebody who maybe doesn't have that extra, money to do so right now.
No, it makes sense.
You guys.
Yeah,
Yeah.
go
Thank you
for
so
it.
much.
Do that for
Yeah.
Megan. I want to like promote on social media, so I'm gonna do it that way. So yeah, more to come on that.
Yeah.
Check the show notes for details. Anyway, thank you so much. You have like given us a good chunk of your time here, so thank you. Really appreciate it. So glad to have you back and to see this literally come full circle as our podcast is coming full circle.
Mm-hmm. Big thing.
Thank you for having me so much. I appreciate and all your thoughtful questions. I really appreciate it.
My God, I've just got so many more. So don't worry, I'm sure we'll be back a third time.
Just about to say.
Okay. Well, thanks everybody. Back at you next week.
I believe it, baby.